tell you about my friend Toby and how I kind of hated him. Let me explain, because you all have those friends, right, where like you love the guy, he's so nice, he's so caring, but he also just kind of drives you up a wall a little bit, you know? Like, you kind of love to hate him, you kind of hate to love him, you know? It's one of those things. That was me and Toby. Toby just had one of those voices, you know, that just like kind of sounds like nails scraping on the wall, you know? So he was kind of hard to listen to in general, but also he was a bit of a nuisance. Like, he was just so good at getting all up in your business, right in the middle of like you working on a project or you're working on dinner, and he's just always right there, always needs your attention. I love Toby, but I also kind of hated Toby. It might relieve you to know, like, Toby was a dog, okay? Toby was a dog. I had the amazing opportunity to be a resident pastor at the Ransom Church in Sioux Falls. It was an apprenticeship where I got to learn how to be a pastor, and one of the parts of that deal was I was brought into Bob and Julie Westendorf's home for those 2 years. They were my host family to provide, like, not just a place for me to sleep, but food and all this awesome stuff. Their generosity was amazing to me. But a part of that package included their 2 dogs, Toby and Lucy, okay? Lucy was great. We love Lucy, okay? That was a show reference to the, you know, I love Lucy. Everybody loves Lucy. Lucy was great. Toby, depended on your day. You know, they both were about like this big, you know, a little bit larger than a chinchilla, if that gives you a reference. They're more akin to rodents than dogs, essentially. And Toby, yeah, Toby was Toby. He was a nuisance. I loved him, but I hated him. So, one summer, Bob and Julie were taking an extended vacation from home. They were going out of the country. They were going to go visit Israel, actually, and they asked me, since I was already living there, to steward their home for them, right? To take care of their home, to house it, make sure the lawn got mowed and all that stuff, and also to take care of their dogs, right? Easy peasy, got this down. So, I'll never forget this day. I was mowing the front lawn, looked gorgeous. I went through the back gate, mowed the back lawn, looked gorgeous. I was wrapping up my duties here as a faithful steward of the Westendorf home. And then I looked, and I had left the gate open. And Toby was nowhere to be found. So I scavenged that house. I looked everywhere in every nook and cranny to see, where is this daggum dog? You know, where is Toby? He is not that smart. He is old. Surely he wouldn't have gotten that far. Lo and behold, I searched for 3 hours around that neighborhood, calling the Humane Society. Nothing. I kept coming up short. This dog was lost. This dog was lost. And listen, like, losing a pet is traumatic in itself. Losing someone else's pet is even worse, right? Like, I was just wondering, you know, like, the best case scenario if Bob and Julie found out I lost their dog is that I was going to be put out on the streets. You know, that was the best case scenario. What was going to happen to me, I don't know. I even missed my shift at the coffee shop I was working at because I was working so hard to find this dog. I don't think I've ever been so terrified, nervous, anxious in my life, right? Until I got a call back from the Humane Society. Toby had been found. He was lost, and now he's found, was blind, but now he could see, right? Actually, no, he was also going blind too, so that was another issue with Toby. He was an old dog. But I found Toby. I was never so happy to see that dog again. So I was able to tell Bob and Julie, hey, I lost your dog, but I found him. I promise, I found him. What's the point of the story? What's the point of this Toby story? Stewardship is the intense care of that which is not your own. But the consequence of failing stewardship increases as the value of the resource increases, okay? In other words, the higher a resource's value, the larger the consequence to fail to steward it well. So if I broke a cooking utensil of Bob and Julie's, no big deal. I just had to buy them a new one. That's like $10, right? If I lost their dog, That's a much more serious consequence, right? To fail to steward their dog. Well, now imagine, what if I caught Bob and Julie's house on fire with their 2 dogs in it? Talk about a insanely huge consequence to fail to steward that well. Immense consequences. So, a question to pose to you this morning. If everything in the world belongs to God, then everything you own is technically God's. Therefore, if nothing you own is truly yours, then why aren't we near as concerned with stewarding them well for God's purposes? Yeah, that's what we're talking about this morning. That's where we're going today. So if you have a Bible, open up to 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 1 through 7. Just 7 verses today. I'm reading from the New Living Translation. I want to remind you, this is our 7th and last week in a summer series about the prophet Elisha. Prophets were people anointed by God to speak his word to God's people, specifically when they were living in sin and wayward living. Okay, they were obstinate to God's commands, so therefore the prophet said, if you continue in your sin, you're going to be punished. If you repent and turn from your ways, you will be saved, right? And that's what Elisha's doing. But what's interesting about Elisha is his stories are filled with all of these miracles that he performed. So we've kind of been spending the summer to go through all those different miracles that he has been doing. And so this is the last one we're going to focus on, and it's pretty sweet and kind of crazy, okay? So let's go ahead and read the whole story in one go in 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 1 through 7. One day the group of prophets came to Elisha and told him, as you can see, this place where we meet with you is too small. Let's go down to the Jordan River where there are plenty of logs. There we can build a new place for us to meet. All right, he told them, go ahead. Please come with us, someone suggested. I will, he said. So he went with them. When they arrived at the Jordan, they began cutting down trees. But as one of them was cutting a tree, his axe head fell into the river. Oh, sir, he cried, it was a borrowed axe. Where did it fall? The man of God asked. When he showed him the place, Elisha cut a stick and threw it into the water at that spot. Then the axe head floated to the surface. Grab it, Elisha said. And the man reached out and grabbed it. What? Okay. I love this story so much. So let's just start at the beginning. Let's just recap everything we just read. So Elisha is the leader of an ever-increasing group of prophets, which is amazing. Okay, despite this season of God's people being very obstinate, worshiping idols, living in sin, there is a growing amount of people serving as prophets under Elisha's leadership. It was growing so much that their original meeting place where they gathered was getting too small. So they needed a bigger space, to build a larger headquarters of God's prophetic ministry, I guess. This is where Elisha could feed them, pizza and to talk about the strategies of where we're going to go next. All right, you over there, you're going to go up to the tribe of Naphtali and you're going to say this, or, maybe to pray with each other, whatever. They needed a new space to gather because we've all been in places where you're a little too tight, a little too cramped. It gets a little uncomfy, right? They need a larger space. So they head down to the Jordan River where there's lots of logs, and they have a variety of tools here, one of them being an axe of some sort, right? So this one prophet, I guess, he's just lugging away at this. I don't even know if I'm using this thing right. I've never used an axe at all. I'm going to bust my leg with this thing. He's going ham on these logs to build this house. And at some point when he goes to lug it like this, the axe head flies off the rod, lands in the Jordan River with a loud kerplunk. And that prophet cries out to Elisha saying, oh no! That axe was borrowed! God save me! And for us, we just think, what's the big deal, right? A little hand axe probably costs $20, $30 at Ace Hardware, right? Maybe one of these guys, maybe closer to 50, but this is an axe. What's the big deal? Well, we forget when we ask that question, it's because we're reading this passage through our 21st century lens where tools like this are readily accessible just right down the street at Ace Hardware. Okay? Remember, this was 2,800 years ago. This was in the Bronze Age. Okay? This was in the Bronze Age where a bronze tool would cost maybe the equivalent of $1,400 for any tool, right? But this axe in particular would have been made of iron, which was a very rare metal that was very, very efficient, but very, very expensive. Okay? So, to this prophet, losing that axe head might have been more of like the equivalent of you borrowing your friend's Tesla and driving it into a lake. Okay? Like that is the level of debt he is now in. But another thing to remember here, it's not just that he lost this axe head, that it was borrowed. Back in Israel's culture, okay, they didn't, if you borrowed something, you didn't have a way of paying it back like by taking out a credit card loan or going to the bank and asking for a loan and, so you can get the money and then pay it off later or to return it, right? That's not how it worked. If you were in debt to anybody, okay, the way how you paid off that debt was you were then enslaved as a servant to the lender. And you had to work for the lender until you worked enough to pay off, essentially, what you lost them. So here's like a modern example of how this would work. If you wanted to purchase that Ford Bronco that you've just, for whatever reason, really, really want in your garage, because Ford Broncos, I guess, you see them everywhere. Instead of taking out a bank loan to pay it off, instead, you would work for Ford for however long it takes for you to essentially earn the Ford Bronco, okay? You'd be enslaved to Ford to get that car. That's how it worked here. So it wasn't just a matter of he lost an axe head. He was about to be enslaved. Bit more dire circumstances, right? So what can we possibly learn here from this story? How does it apply? Well, there are 3 points that I want to go over today. And the first point is this: steward what's not yours. Steward what's not yours. Duh, right? Like that's kindergarten ethics 101, right? If you borrow your friend's toys, you give them back. If you break them, you fix them. Or this applies to anything else. Like I borrowed Cody Thompson's lawnmower this weekend to help me, because my other one's busted. So I returned it back to Cody when I was done with it, If you go and you make a mess at someone else's house, you clean it up before you leave. Like basic ethics. Steward what's not yours. We all get that principle. But here's the deeper core of this principle I want us to get at, okay? What do you do when everything about your life doesn't belong to you, but belongs to God? What does stewardship look like then? Our scriptures understood this abundantly well. If God created everything, then it all belongs to him, right? Therefore, anything you have is because God lent it to you to steward well. Here's just a couple of Bible passages that really support this idea, this radical idea. Psalm 24:1 says, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. The world and all its people belong to him." 1 Chronicles 29:11-12 says, "Yours, O Lord, is the greatness, the power, the glory, the victory, and the majesty. Everything in the heavens and on earth is yours. Wealth and honor come from you alone, for you rule over everything." Colossians 1:16 says, "For through him God created everything in the heavenly realms and on earth. He made the things we can see and the things we can't see. Everything was created through him and for him." In Romans 11:36, lastly, says, "For everything comes from him and exists by his power and is intended for his glory. All glory to him forever and ever." Amen. So in terms of all your stuff and all the things you own, everything about your life, here's what this means. We need to be good stewards, not borrowers. We need to be stewards, not borrowers. And there's a crucial difference, okay? Here's the difference between the two. A borrower asks to use something from someone for a period of time, like the prophet, right? Asking to borrow that axe for a period of time. But a steward is asked to care for something by someone for a period of time. Let me go back to this weekend. I was a borrower when I asked Cody if I could use his lawnmower for my grass, right? But I would be a steward if Cody asked me to mow their lawn while they were away for an extended vacation. You see the difference? You see the difference? So if nothing you own is technically yours, but it is given to you by God, then that means he is lending it to you as a steward to care for his purposes. What does this look like? If he has given you kids, You need to steward them by treating them well, disciplining them, and discipling them into Christ likeness. If he has given you a job, you need to work at it with all your might as if God is your boss. If he has given you a home, don't let it get trashy or destroyed. Even if you have toddlers in your midst, it is so hard, we still try to keep our house together at least a little bit. If he has given you a lawn, tend to it and don't let it get too overgrown. We also have toddlers, and the last thing I want to do is pick weeds from my rock bed. But guess what we had to do this weekend? Pick weeds from our rock bed. Steward it. If he's given you money, then steward it by being generous to the church and to others. Save for the future. Don't overspend on the things you don't need. If he has given you skills, steward them to glorify God by serving his church, serving others, and doing your job well. If he has given you pets, care for them. Don't mistreat them. Even if they're dumb like Toby, right? If he's given you an axe, you need to fix it when it breaks. Or at least tell the person you borrowed it from if it broke, right? When we think that everything we have truly belongs to us, and it's easy to get lazy in our parenting, or to slack off at work, or to let the house get trashed, or let the lawn get atrocious, or spend our money however we want, or just consume the church's services without serving the church ourselves. That's what happens when we have a borrower mindset. But if everything we have technically belongs to the Lord, then how can we steward it with the same sense of urgency that prophet had when he lost that axe head? It was borrowed. I need to steward it well. Right? We need to steward what's not ours, and it's technically everything to your name. And this idea of stewarding what's not ours, especially if it all belongs to God, leads us to this second point that we can learn from this story. Don't go into debt. Oh, it's a financial management sermon. Ha, dang it. Sorry you showed up today. That's kind of how it went into it. Anyway, you see, ancient Israel, like I said, lived in a vastly different culture, right? Riches were often found in precious jewels and metals and were reserved for the very, very wealthy. Therefore, the common people who didn't have these precious jewels and metals would trade possessions. If you wanted to purchase, this axe, then maybe you would have to purchase it through 20 cattle or something like that. Which is also why if you needed to pay it back, and you lost the axe head or something broke, the lender then possessed you until you somehow provided the efforts or the work back to him to make up for the loss. Does that make sense? The point is, if you don't want to be enslaved, you spend according to what you have, which was a very tangible idea back then. But for us, however, we live in what's known as a currency economy. We rarely purchase anything by trading goods, right? It's like, could you imagine going to a restaurant and, the lady gives you a check and you're like, sweet, does this cover it? These are like $70, so at least half. They're like, this is $35, this should cover it, right? Here you go. Doesn't work that way. Right? We work a job where money, this magical number, just shows up in your bank account and is all of a sudden worth for you to purchase stuff. And we exchange money for goods. Rarely do we exchange one good for another. Your money is the greatest physical resource God has given you and has entrusted you with in today's economy to make changes. It's how you purchase all the stuff, but it's also how you can give towards other causes that make things happen, like Resilient Church or another nonprofit or some other charity or ministry across the world. Right? But here's the deal. Here's the deal. The problem today is that a lot of us don't actually own what we think is ours. A lot of us don't actually own what we think is ours because what we think is ours actually belongs to these little guys, don't they? Our credit cards. Our loans from the bank, the government, right? They are the ones who often own so much of ours. We have the illusion that we possess this stuff, but really we're borrowing money from someone else that's not ours. If you use debt to purchase something, it's not truly yours until the debt is paid off. It feels like yours, but it's not. So think about this. Maybe you've racked up the credit card debt for purchasing the car or the phone or the tools or the drinks or the food and all that, and guess what? You don't technically own any of that. It's the creditors who do until you pay that card off. And so then think about it, if you're spending the bulk of your money on a larger house than what you need, a car that's larger than what you need and fancier than what you need, and therefore, that's where all your cash flow is going towards all these things you don't need, and then you're having to use these things to pay for all the other stuff that maybe you need and all the stuff you really don't need, then you're going to only accrue more and more of that debt. You see, and the issue isn't necessarily borrowing money in itself, because there are some things where you do have to borrow money, especially when it comes to mortgages. Who just has $300,000 they can just crank out to purchase a home? Not a lot of people. Mason does. Yeah. He hit the jackpot with the lottery a couple of months ago, so just kidding. We don't gamble, we promise. What did you say? If only. If only. Just kidding. Like mortgages is one thing. Student loans, for you to be able to get a good quality education somewhere when you don't have those funds. Like, there is a time where we need to borrow money as long as you pay it back. This just goes back, you got to steward what's not yours. We tell our kids, where if you borrow your friend's toys, you have to give it back. But then imagine, if I borrowed Cody's lawnmower, and I just said, nah, it's mine. What do you think's going to happen? The dude's shredded. He's going to punch me in the face and hurt me, Cody's the nicest guy ever. You should meet him sometime. I wish they were here. He'd probably love that attention. So it becomes a problem when you have to keep using your credit cards to pay for all the stuff that you don't truly need to just get by, because all your cash is going all towards these other exorbitant senses of spending, right? So this is why Proverbs 22:8 says, "The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is the slave to the lender." And honestly, I don't think there is a better word that captures the feeling of being in debt than slavery. And I mean, slavery is a packed word. There's a lot that connotates with that, especially when you look at just the state of some of the other places in the world, let alone our country's history. But think about it. When you have so much that you feel like is yours, but you have massive debt that's constantly accruing interest, that is just, you don't feel like you own yourself. You don't feel like you own yourself. It's oppressive to our souls. Debt does that to us. At the end of the day, we don't feel like good stewards of what God's given us because we become slaves of what lenders have given us. We don't feel like good stewards of what God has given us because we have become slaves of what lenders have given us. And listen, this conversation on money and financial management, stress, this hits home for every single one of us in this room for different ways. All of us do. Especially, in light of inflation, especially if something crazy in life happens and you're just struck with an emergency or healthcare needs or something, and it's just ravished you, right? And you're trying to provide for this, and we are in tight spots financially. I get paid the big bucks to say this, okay? So hear me on this. We need to be honest. When we look at our financial situation, though, and we bemoan all the things that are going on that makes this hard, we have to be brutally honest, and that we can't blame our financial hardship on inflation or all these external things, or what the government's doing, if the majority of your problems are self-inflicted. Because you're not being a good steward. You're a great borrower, but you're not a good steward. Therefore, the more you borrow, the larger the consequence if it's not returned and if we don't figure this out. And I'm not talking about more interest that accrues every month on your credit card. I'm not talking about you having your home foreclosed if you miss mortgage payments. I'm talking about spiritual consequences too. This isn't just a financial issue. This is a spiritual issue too. 1 Timothy 6:10 says, "For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And some people, craving money, have wandered from the true faith and pierced themselves with many sorrows." When you are strapped financially, you feel stressed. And when you feel stressed, that kind of brings out the worst in us, doesn't it? You make decisions that you regret. You have outbursts of anger at your kids. You have major arguments with your spouse. You start numbing it with alcohol and excessive eating. Or worse, you go and spend more money to numb it. You just spiral. Those aren't financial issues. Those are 100% spiritual issues. So what do we do? What do we do if we feel strapped in these kind of situations, okay? Well, what did the prophet do? He cried out to God. He cried out to God. So notice when the prophet lost this axe head, he didn't say, oh, well, I'll go find another one. I just won't tell the guy. We live hundreds of miles away. He's probably not even going to remember. I'll just sweep it under the rug, and I'm just going to assume it'll just work out. It'll be fine. Some of you manage your finances like that. That's why you have so much trouble. Okay? No, you know what he did? He cried out to Elisha, the man of God, and said, it was a borrowed axe. Sir, I borrowed it in good faith, but my situation took an unexpected turn for the worse. Please get me out of this. Help me. Why? Because he was being a good steward, and he refused to be enslaved to this lender. And so Elisha performed a miracle, and the power of God made that axe head float and saved the man's financial situation. So what's the point? As petty as it might seem, as ridiculous as it might seem, God cares about your financial situations. He does. If it's a burden to you, it's a burden to him, and he wants to help you. Because our finances and our stewardship greatly impacts our faithfulness and our well-being in all forms of life, right? If everything belongs to God, then every money decision you make is a spiritual decision. It is. It's impacting somebody, you, someone else, slave trade market that you don't know what you're supporting by getting the cheaper options. Hashtag thrifting. And this seems insane, right? But for those who are in debt, you don't know the amount of freedom that can come when you're out of it. For those who are spiritually free, you don't know the amount of burden that those who are in debt like this experience every day unless you've made yourself and worked yourself out of it. So the third point of this, and we'll wrap up with this point, is this. If you're in debt, God can help. We should bring these concerns to him in prayer because he cares. If you are in need of a miracle, cry out to God for him to give you a floating axe head of some sort. This better be the thumbnail for our sermon on YouTube, Mason. Just me like this, all right? May he give you a floating axe head of your situation. Pray for him to come through with a miracle. I don't know. Pray crazy, huge, audacious prayers of something you need. Maybe you pray somehow the government will forgive your student loans. With how the current administration is going, I don't know if that's even going to happen, right? Probably don't bank on that too much. However, pray for maybe a random deposit to show up in your bank account that you don't know where it came from. Whoa, I've heard stories of that with students. Something came in and I didn't have to pay for this semester and I don't know how. Maybe for you, just a miraculous floating axe head is someone ahead of you paid for your meal at McDonald's and you're like, wow, that was amazing. What's your floating axe head you're praying for God to give you in terms of your finances? Yeah, maybe some miraculous thing like that for a random check to just show up that provides for your next month's worth of needs. But maybe your floating axe head you need to be praying for is a change of heart and behavior towards your finances and your resources. Maybe for you, the miraculous act of God to serve you, to transform you, to go from an incessant borrower who keeps asking for what you don't have to a steward who intensely cares for what you do have. Maybe for you, it's learning to stop spending the money you don't have and to learn how to, maybe you need to work harder at your job. Maybe so that you can get noticed for that promotion. Maybe your floating axe head is to dive into that side hustle, right? To try to earn that extra stream of income. Casey and I have 3 extra side hustles we do so that we can stay afloat. Maybe you need to do the same thing. Part of that includes plasma, right? I donate plasma twice a week. Helps pay for groceries. Okay? We're not that poor, I promise. It just helps us. Or honestly, maybe for you, the miraculous act of God that's the equivalent of a floating axe head is just learning how to be content. 1 Timothy 6:6-8 says, "Yet true godliness with contentment is itself great wealth. After all, we brought nothing with us when we came into the world, and we can't take anything with us when we leave it. So if we have enough food and clothing, let us be content." God wants to help you. He wants to serve you. But does it require a change of heart on your part? A change of habits, a change in mindset? Because it has less to do with these and way more to do with this and this. And that's the domain of the Spirit. Wherever my axe is, I'm going to put it over here so you all can see it. We're going to move into a time of prayer. So I'm going to invite our worship team to come back up here, Mason and Sydney. And we've been having Vince come up here to do like some prayer times over people, just in response of anything that you need. But we actually have Vince and a couple of others who are going to be up here specifically to pray over any financial strain you might have. Like we said, finances is a spiritual matter. And it's something that can weigh on us. And so I don't know what you're facing. I don't know what you need prayer over. But we just have a couple of extra people up here to help pray for these needs. So at any point during this song, if you want to come up and receive prayer from anybody, by all means, anytime for the rest of this service. Okay, we're going to do 2 songs. We'll do communion in between. If you feel led to do it at any point, please do. And I'm going to be the first one up there because I'm feeling this train too. I need prayer just as much for this, for the things that we're facing. And so may this just be a time that you take what you need, receive prayer if you need it. Let's go before the Lord, shall we?